Happy New Year from the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and I want to thank you for listening to our show over the years. I have a challenge for you for 2023, and that is to make a goal of being the best part of someone's day every day. We'll explore that thought and more on this special New Year's edition of the Business of Story. Thankfully, 2022 was an especially busy year for me because, like many of you, my business struggled through the pandemic, and the rebound was actually a little bit slower than I had hoped for. But I got to work with so many great organizations and people this past year, and I want to say a thank you to the folks at Goodwill of Central and Northern Arizona, including Goodwill of Monocacy Valley in Maryland, who brought me in to work with their leadership teams to expand their business storytelling. Walmart Canada was the new client this year, and I'm so excited for 2023 as we are going to scale the Business of Story training throughout their associates around Canada. We worked with Carvana, Medela, Trimble, Banner Health, the Home Depot, who I've been working with in the past and are coming back for more this coming year. Also had the pleasure of working with the University of Dayton Center for Leadership and its United States Air Force cohort we trained in a full-day Business of Story training session. At the beginning of the year, we got to work with one of my favorite pastimes, and that was the National Hop Growers Association. Also worked with the World Bank, Basis Technology, and most recently, right here in Phoenix, Arizona, Master Electronics and A1 Garage Door Service. Those are just a few of the great people and organizations the Business of Story has been blessed with to work with in 2022, and there are so many more that I want to thank you all, especially for trusting us with your business, sales, and marketing storytelling training. It's been a blast, and I look forward to working with most of you again in 2023. Of all of the in-person and virtual mastery courses and keynotes that I did over the past year, my most memorable moment came when I was doing a follow-up virtual session with a very large veterinary association in August. One of their young writers, we'll call her Sally, jumped on the Zoom session and said to me, "Park, I'm a professional communicator who graduated with a degree in journalism and can see how the ABT might work, but I'm not going to use it because it feels too stilted to me. So I'm just going to keep writing the way I always have." Well, I immediately laughed because I thought she was, having some fun pulling a joke on me. Then I looked around on the Zoom screen and I could see confusion in her faces and her colleagues' faces. That's when I realized she wasn't joking at all. In fact, Sally didn't even know what she had done. I said, "Sally, did you hear that you actually used an ABT to explain to me why you will never use the ABT?" Well, there was a solid moment there, and then everyone started laughing, including Sally. She had not realized what she had done and was actually quite surprised at how naturally the ABT rolled out of her mouth. Well, that's one of my all-time favorite ABT moments from hours upon hours of storytelling training over the past 12 years. Now, if you'd like to strengthen your narrative intuition and have ABTs naturally rolling out of you so that your messages land right the first time, every time, then dedicate this January for learning and applying the ABT in all of your communications. Just visit businessofstory.com/ABT and put this messaging marvel to work for you in the new year and start telling your stories with real impact. But where do you find your stories? Those moments that have defined who you are today and inform why you do what you do? Well, we have a special guest for you who has just gone through the personal archaeological dig of finding those formative moments that power her personal storytelling.
had to call my mom, and my mom was one of the ones that actually brought up a lot of these stories from her own memory. And then I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I remember that. And we would put those details through together, or friends of mine from childhood. So it was actually quite an incredible bonding or like connecting exercise actually in cultivating those stories, and then super impactful when I was able to share those stories as well. So it was like a double win.
Sabrina Hansen is the Senior Director of Strategic Relationships at Embark Behavioral Health. Her purpose is to create a culture of helping through connection and building meaningful relationships to overcome the stigma of mental health in America. While learning her master's degree in social work, Sabrina joined a telehealth pilot program serving vulnerable populations during the COVID-19 pandemic. She has spread her mission of compassion and well-being in her work for a nationally recognized nonprofit healthcare organization, one of the largest global cosmetic companies, and a 4-diamond luxury destination resort focusing on wellness, nutrition, fitness, and personal transformation. Sabrina has also served as a volunteer for the American Cancer Society for over 7 years. Today, you'll learn from Sabrina how to excavate your own personal stories to create professional bonds and trust. The importance of finding the courage to redefine yourself when the universe throws you a curveball. And how one simple goal of being the best part of someone's day will make a world of difference in your career. All that and more with Sabrina Hansen of Embark Behavioral Health to kick off the new year right here on The Business of Story. Sabrina, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Well, it's so nice to have met you earlier this year. We've had a lot of fun working together on your own storytelling. And then, of course, being able to do a session, half-day session with your folks at Embark Behavioral Health. And so it's just great to have you here for you to share your story and all the great work you all are doing at Embark and how you're incorporating storytelling into your world. So you ready to roll?
I am ready as I'll ever be, yes.
Why don't you let our listeners know what exactly Embark Behavioral Health is? And then we'll go from there.
We believe that everyone deserves to live a life worth living. But right now, and we can see it, in our own communities, we're really experiencing a mental health crisis. So like depression and anxiety and suicide are on the rise, especially really in young people. And so at Embark, what we do is we support our youth and their families who are experiencing these mental health challenges and really navigating the mental health journey, because it can be so complicated. I'm a social worker myself, and in school, we learned quite a bit, but I was also totally unaware of access and resources available. And so at Embark Behavioral Health, we have a full continuum of care. That's what we call it. And many of you may be familiar with that term or may not be, but we support families across that continuum and firmly believe that that's the way to healing our communities and healing generations and creating more joy.
And do you work with people of all ages?
So we work primarily with teens and adolescents. So our programs really do primarily support students ages 9 to about 28, give or take. But then the family, so parents are very much included in that process. So they might not necessarily be, the specific client per se or the identified client, but we're certainly interacting with the families and making sure that they're engaged and they're part of our programs as well.
Can you take us to a moment in your life that you look back on and now recognize that it informs who you are and what you do today in the world?
There's so many, and Park, you've been great putting a little plug in for you, because I feel like in our own lives, oftentimes we don't really notice those micro moments that like made us who we are. And here I am, a social worker, like having done 3 years of like an inward journey just to get my master's degree. And the questions you asked me during our time together really helped me kind of find what those moments were. But I do feel like for me, I grew up in a restaurant environment. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs. My dad is a chef straight from Italy. He moved to the United States in his 30s, has this like heavy, even to this day, he's like in his 60s. He has like the heaviest, thickest Italian accent. I'm like, Dad, like, I call him Papa. That's how you say dad in Italian. But I'm like, Papa, like nobody can understand what you're saying, but you've been in this country like way longer than you haven't been at this point. I think what I saw there was that both my mom and my dad, so my dad was the chef and my mom did kind of more of the front of the house, but I would shadow them, right? Like I grew up like before I could even walk, my mom was pregnant with me and they were running the restaurant. So I would watch them. So I was either being held in my dad's arms as he was like stirring his famous like pomodoro sauce, or I would be like shadowing, like literally like Peter Pan, like the shadow of my mom as she was dancing around, the dining room helping clients. And I remember that she was helping a table and there was just some regular customers there. And I was just staring at my mom, like the way that she was interacting with this table. She had brought them over. I don't even remember what the dish was, but it was some sort of pasta dish and like the steam was coming off of it. And I just thought, oh my gosh, if I was that person, I'd want to eat it right up. But he turned to my mom and he said, and my mom's name is Amy. He's like, Amy, turn around and look at Sabrina. And I remember looking at my mom like dead in the eyes and just like feeling so warm and just like connected and loved. And we looked at each other and I just felt, I guess now having the vocabulary, awe. But this customer, when he was telling my mom to look at me, he's like, it's almost as if she saw a unicorn. Like I was just in my own zone. And what I realized in that moment is that I was watching like magic happen in front of me. And my mom was just so present with all of her customers. And she was essentially becoming the best part of their day because she was truly with them and like attending to their needs. She was aware of their needs before they even knew that they were their needs. And I think for me, that just sat with me. I've hence termed that the unicorn effect. And I really feel like that drives my behaviors every single day.
And so you see that now popping up in your life in how you work with your colleagues, how you work with your customers, your vendors, the folks that help support people live their best lives. How do you now see that playing out in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want this to sound like so simplistic, but again, I feel like if my only goal when I wake up in the morning is to be the best part of someone's day, and every interaction I make a conscious effort to do that, I have found that it has allowed me to build trusting relationships so fast. Again, like everything that I do, I feel like comes from a genuine place. And so, it is pure, and I wouldn't be saying something that I don't think is accurate or truthful. But I do feel like it has allowed me to be able to build and nurture relationships with families or with external or internal stakeholders in ways that allow us to break the stigma of mental health, right? Because we all need to do this together as a team. And so to create almost that community.
I love that line. I was working with you on one of your presentations during your recent conference, and in the middle of your script was that line, be the best part of someone's day. And it just struck me, and I said, Sabrina, you're burying the lead. This is a beautiful theme for the overall presentation. And I got to tell you, right after that, I was up in Seattle visiting my 97-year-old mother up there who's doing absolutely fantastic, still living in the same home where she and my dad raised their 7 kids, me and my 6 siblings. And I found this drawer in my mom's utility room, and I opened it up, and here was my dad's old mid-century chrome cast iron label maker, the kind where you crunch out like a label in a blue label and then you peel off the back and stick it on something. And when I got back to Phoenix, I couldn't shake that line, be the best part of someone's day. I liked it so much. And I thought about my dad in that. And I thought, he lived by that same sentiment throughout his entire long 91-year life. And so I clanked out that note on a label, and I've got it stuck right here on my computer so I can think about that every day. I want to thank you for that, and that came out of your story.
I feel like I just got very emotional. I know that you had said that story. I think you alluded to it on a Twitter post, but you just expressing that verbally to me for the first time, just the legacy, right? And that you remembered your dad and that this is this connection with him too, even after he's gone. And that legacy of being the best part of someone's day allows you, I don't want to say to be missed, if that's the epitome of the human experience, as if you were really doing the work while you were present and alive, that perhaps, you would really be missed because you're just making that big of an impact. But I think that's beautiful.
Well,
so
you'd
thank
be
you.
very memorable.
And memorable.
Absolutely. Well, you have a very interesting background. Can you give us the quick cliff notes of where you grew up and your journey through adolescence and now, in your burgeoning career in the mental health world?
Yeah. So I feel like I've been all over the place, but I'm a dual citizen, Italian American, and spent pretty much my youth and I would say adolescent years in a combination of both Italy and the United States. I grew up in Southern California, so a bustling, kind of more metropolitan area, Orange County, California, for those who know. But then when I would live and spend time in Italy, I lived in a town of 2,000 people. Literally, I feel I know that Beauty and the Beast was not set in Italy, but it was very much that quaint provincial town. Everybody knows each other. They could break out into a Broadway musical at any point in time. And then when I was in high school, I actually moved to Southern Utah, which was a completely different space from Italy and or Southern California, but beautiful in its own right. And I went to a performing arts high school there, did my undergrad in Southern Utah, and then my husband and I met my husband in Southern Utah. We moved to California again, kind of back to my hometown, and then we made our way to DC, and that is where I am doing this podcast from right now.
But you're missing one of my favorite nuggets.
Uh-oh.
Share the story about your young theater career, because you were a competitive soccer player and you didn't have soccer at this performing arts school. So you were a bit of round peg, square hole.
Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh, that transition. And for those of you who know me, I am kind of that candy canes and rainbows and sunshine 95% of the time. So it's I do really try to see the best in things. And for the most part, that, again, is truly how I feel. I wake up, even if it's a gloomy day, it's the sun is just bursting right through my window always. But yeah, you're right. So when I moved from Southern California, I was a competitive soccer player, and that was a huge part of my identity. And then, to be quite honest, really randomly, we wound up moving to Southern Utah, and my parents wanted us to go. There's 4 other sisters that I have, so I'm the oldest of 5. Wanted us to go to a smaller school, and this particular school that they chose, had no athletics at all. And I remember there was this so if you picture, I don't know if you're familiar with St. George, Utah or Sedona, and you just picture these majestic
the
red
big
rocks.
red rocks and the
Yes.
canyons. And we live right above Sedona right now, so I can picture it absolutely.
Yes. So I swear I was so lucky. Again, in hindsight, like I like went to high school at a resort, basically. I mean, like the views were stunning. But again, at the time, like all you can think about is like, I want to go to the mall or, whatever. So there's this long winding road. It was probably like a 5-minute drive up the canyon to get to our school. And I remember, again, these experiences are oftentimes with my mom, but I remember sitting in the passenger seat. I was like really stressed and anxious because I'm like, how am I going to do this? I don't know how to sing. I don't know how to dance. I don't know about acting. And now I'm like going to this school where like all the students are experts at this. Like I'm totally out of my element. And I remember just like looking over at my mom and I'm like, I can reinvent myself. Like, why would that be so hard? Like, soccer was my thing, but like, I can learn new things. And my mom's like, yeah, you can learn new things. So again, it wasn't easy. And I swear it wasn't even during my senior year. My dance teacher is like, if there's one thing you learn, it's just to know your left foot from your right foot, Sabrina. Like, I don't know that I was ever like the best at any of it, but I certainly did make it through. It was a great experience, but it was certainly an intentional mindset shift.
And what was your first role in your first play?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think it was 42nd Street. And I was just a random, like ensemble actor. But I think to this day, it was my favorite role because like you never think anybody is looking quite at you. So you can really just like be in the moment. I wound up, having other more, I would say like larger forward facing roles. But I think that was certainly my first and probably still to this day, one of my most favorite roles.
In that moment in time when you felt like you had to reinvent yourself because you didn't have that soccer field to play on there, and so you were going to, take off into theater, and I'm sure you had some stumbles along the way. What did that teach you that informs, again, how you operate today and maybe empathy for those around you? How does that moment really inform who you are?
In my work right now, I work with families on some really like serious issues, right? And I think that a lot of times families like don't know where to turn, or they might be sending their children, to foreign treatment programs that are outside of their state and to be cared for by strangers, right? And it's just like all of this stuff is so new and overwhelming. And so I think for me, what I learned in that situation is just to be present in that moment and to, I think, recognized really mindset. And that's a really good question. I think meeting myself where I was at, and I think other people where they're at, because you just never know, is really what I learned from that experience. And just going from, again, that present moment, meeting people or yourself where you're at, giving yourself some grace and moving forward.
So you've had a chance to be in front of audiences, and you've been at your career now for quite a while, and you get a chance to be in front of people sharing the Embark story. You and I began working directly together during the summer and getting you set up for that first conference that you presented at. What were some of your story ahas that you didn't know about before we started working together and now are applying them in your world?
So I would definitely say, because again, it was like you were brushing through my presentation with like a fine-tooth comb, and then you really pulled out like being the best part of someone's day. Because again, people are just like, oh, Sabrina, she's sunshine, but like, where is that coming from? What is that? Like, what is that? And I think you really helped to articulate what that is. And then I think for me to then go even deeper and say, well, what is being the best part of someone's day actually look like? How do you do it? I mean, it sounds, again, so simple, but like, what are the pieces of that recipe? And so then again, tapping into like the restaurateur background of me, it was really fun to come up with essentially like that ingredient list or that recipe for what that is. So I would say for me, it is building trust. So like part of that story was like, how did I build trust, right? And how do I make people feel cared for? Because that's also like a big part of being the best part of someone's day. How do I be curious? How do I be different? Like, I think different is better than better. And how do I shine and stand out? So yeah, I was able to carve out things from that story that allowed me to understand how I was navigating like the outreach and business development world that was and is my role, but also then how I could share that with others and how they could do it too in their respective industries.
So your story, the unicorn effect story, we'll call it, when you were a very young girl working with your mom, had you ever shared that story with anybody else in business or at Embark before we worked on it or before we excavated it out of your background?
Yeah, no, and it excavated is like, I felt like it was like an archaeological dig, right? Like I had no idea that was even there. And that's why I think that the work and your gift, right? Like your gift is you help people tap in and refine and fine tune their stories. I had no idea. And I was just, again, kind of like off, for lack of better words, like out in the clouds, like, and it really helped to root me and ground me. And what was so beautiful is like, these stories didn't necessarily come from my own memory, right? Like in that dig, I had to go and interview multiple people that were part of my history. So it's like, I like got on the phone and like called my dad, and my dad and I, had conversations that we've never had before, and had to call my mom, and my mom was one of the ones that actually brought up a lot of these stories from her own memory. And then I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I remember that. And we would put those details through together, or friends of mine from childhood. So it was actually quite an incredible bonding or like connecting exercise actually in cultivating those stories, and then super impactful when I was able to share those stories as well. So it was like a double win.
Well, I'm always looking for intersections in people's lives, because I find that in those intersections where something surprising happens, you weren't expecting it, it triggers your curiosity, it took you down that path that almost, it reveals another passion, in our formative years, that then when you look back on them, you go, oh, I see this intersection. Like my intersection is music, composition and theory, and communications. I, studied both in school. And now what do? I teach the composition and theory of storytelling to be able to have you communicate, on a deeper level and really connect with that understanding, appreciation, and empathy that builds trust with people. But you're right, they're these moments are hidden right before our eyes, and it does take some excavation to get there. Now, when you have shared this story how many times? You have never shared it before. You unveiled it, you revealed it, and you shared it now in business. How many times do you think have you retold that?
I mean, I would say it's still at this point, like from a high level, very professional standpoint, just a handful of times. I mean, it was just this fall that I did the presentation itself. But in those, again, kind of micro moments where I might be at a networking event, or I might be meeting someone for the first time, or maybe we're at some sort of other engagement, I will share parts of that story with them and have.
And what has the reaction been?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just like there's so much more depth. and so much more genuine connection. Because I think like the first question that you asked, like, what do you do? We always ask that question, and then we feel like we come back with this very like robotic, like, I do this, and then nobody really knows like what that even means, because we're talking, like maybe more of the elevator pitch mindset, which we know people really respond better to stories. So I do feel like tapping into my own story has allowed me to just have more genuine and authentic connection and inspire moments perhaps of awe, right? Faster. Like it's just, and we're smiling right now. Like it's been totally wild and transformative.
How about with your colleagues? Do they see another side of you that they didn't know existed before?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the presentation that I did at the conference, I am a little quirky, actually not a little, I'm like very quirky. And so I was wearing like a chef's hat and like really went all the way, embodying, what this unicorn effect was and the recipe to build a unicorn, if you will. And no one had really known my, I would say like cultural background or, as an adult, oftentimes you don't really know a lot about one another's parents, perhaps, unless you're in like a romantic relationship with somebody. But otherwise, like you kind of just see them at face value, and maybe you know their spouse, or maybe you like know their kids, but like it doesn't really extend much further than that. So I feel like ever since I've shared that story, it's just opened up a lot more. And conversations just are much more fruitful and colorful, because we're talking, again, I think at just more depth than the superficial. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you live in DC. Oh, you have 2 cats. Oh, okay, great. You moved from like the West Coast. Instead, now it's like, oh, your dad was a chef and like he can speak Italian and you can speak Italian. And like, oh my gosh, you went to this performing arts school and you were like not always super sunshine, or like there was like hard moments in your life. And like, tell me about that. And so, it's been fun. And people have shared their stories, right? Because I think there's this like feeling naturally of like reciprocity, right? Being a human being. Like if somebody starts sharing a story, like you're like, oh, okay, like it's safe for me to share my story too. Or so it's been great on so many levels, I think externally as well as internally with my own colleagues.
And what's always fun to me anyways, to see when you share a story, how it triggers other stories, just like you were saying with other people. It's like, oh my goodness, she just opened up to me. She was vulnerable to me. She shared something about herself. Now I can't wait to share something about me. And it may well trigger some moments they hadn't thought about for years or maybe ever, but it just flashes in the mind. I mean, that's a beautiful thing about stories. They do get embedded in our brain, whether we can remember them immediately or not. When you tell a right story, it can trigger those. Now, in your exploration of your moments, did you find that one moment would then trigger another? I mean, did you build sort of a talent around finding some of these formative moments that you are using now in your professional life?
Yeah, another great question. And I think honestly, like that was I would say finding those moments was probably like one of the hardest mental workouts, like if you will, that I've ever done, because, and again, I feel like I am a very reflective person, but I didn't really know where to start, right? Because it's like, here I am in my like early 30s. There's just so much. Like, where do I go? Do I start at like 5 years old for my like birth 3 for my first memory, or was it this or was it that? So I will say that for me, interviewing other people that were prominent and very influential people in my own life and asking them about moments that really impacted them when we were together helped. And then that kind of created like a spiral effect for me, because I was like, oh, I remember that too. And like, that was really impactful, and wow. And then we could continue with the dialogue. And then it was really kind of fun because, again, for those of you in sort of the psychological fields, there's something called a Johari window where like you're unaware of certain parts of yourself, but other people see them. And so I did feel like there was parts of me that were exposed that I didn't even know existed until I talked to others. And then I got more curious about myself, and I was like, oh, I didn't know I was that courageous. Like, I would have never described myself as like a brave or courageous person. That's probably like some of the last, like, I feel like I'm so cautious and like rigid, and I always follow the rules. But in some of the conversations I had with people, like, those were kinds of the descriptive words that they were using to identify and describe interactions that we had or ways that I was facing challenges. And so it was extremely eye-opening, extremely thought-provoking, lots of curiosity. I learned a lot about myself.
What's the biggest surprise that came out of it? Of one of the moments that you're like, oh, you know what? I forgot all about that. And it's just like you look back on it now and you go, yeah, that was major.
So I had a professor in college, in my undergrad, who was about the age that I am now when she was teaching, and she had essentially like terminal cancer. And she didn't have long to live. And she, in her very first class, I remember, like, nobody knew that she was going through this, and it was a recent diagnosis for her. But we're starting this, it's a communications class, so there's like 30 of us sitting in this, like classroom, sort of a little bit like auditorium style, and she was at the base and went through the whole syllabus just like usual, any other class. And then there was this like extra page at the end, and she called it her cancer clause. And she basically said, like, I'm telling everyone now that I am actively dying. The prognosis isn't good, but I am going to do everything that I can to live as long as possible. And, she definitely had a lot of hope. But she said, like, I love teaching so much. And her reputation really preceded her. And perhaps this goes back into like being the best part of someone's day. Like, and her name was Addie, like really was the best part of so many students' days. And I didn't even know what I wanted to go into necessarily as far as my degree program until I had a conversation with her in a previous semester. And she really helped. I would say she was probably one of my primary like mentors during, I would say, my college and like young adult years. But she said, I'm gonna stick it out. Like, if I only have a certain amount of time to live, like, I want to continue being an instructor and inspiring. And but you're gonna watch me go through everything. So, like, if I lose my hair, you're gonna see that. If I am feeling like super tired or lethargic or ill, like, you're going to see that too, but I promise it's not going to impact like your own education and learning. And I just found that to be, again, in that moment, like, I was scared, right? Because it's like, oh my gosh, somebody I really care about just told me that they were dying. And I had never had anybody in my life pass away or like have anything like a serious chronic illness occur to them, thankfully, up until then. But the fact that she was so vulnerable, and the fact that she was like really true to what she loved, and the fact that she allowed the students the opportunity to say like, okay, this is not for me. Like, I don't think that I can watch this. There was another opportunity for them to take the same exact class at the same exact time with another instructor. But I went through that journey with her. I don't think any of the students wound up dropping the class or moving the class. We were all there with her, saw her through her ups and downs. And, eventually she did wind up passing away. And her legacy and all the things that she taught, again, by being vulnerable and by being so strong in moments of such suffering and pain and being so dedicated and putting service first, was really inspiring. And after that, I wound up being a volunteer with the American Cancer Society for a number of years after that. And again, cancer had never impacted my life in any way. And then when I became a social worker later on in my life as kind of a second career, I thought that that's what I was going to go into. And I was working primarily with oncology patients. And so I guess in hindsight, when I was really going back, and I know this has been a long tangent that I'm saying right now, but like when I was looking back and I thought, oh my gosh, like 19-year-old Sabrina or 18-year-old Sabrina, like the choices that she made at 28 was because of what had happened to her at 18 when she realized that like she just had, I guess, felt like I just had a purpose in helping people who were undergoing a serious chronic illness. And that was what dictated my choices later on in life. And I just felt like Addie was like, she just really left a handprint on my heart. That's really, really what it comes down to.
And I imagine that is now manifesting itself through the work that you are doing with these families whose kids, adolescents, very young adults are going through some really challenging times. It's not necessarily related to cancer, but it is around mental health and helping them overcome addictions and any other things that might be going on. I would imagine that plays a big role in your work there at Embark.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, because it's just like the families are so vulnerable. It's a scary place. Like you don't know what's going to happen next. Like you're being introduced to so many people. You have a crisis already on your hands, but then you have to like live your life, right? Like life doesn't stop just because you have a mental health issue or challenge, or you have a chronic illness. Like things are still going on. And how do you keep going? And I just feel like for me, all I want to do is just try to be the best support for families that I possibly can be, right? And just to be there with them, like in those painful moments, and to not be afraid. Because I think sometimes like we just need someone to sit with us in those hard times. Like we might not have the answer. And again, like speaking purely human to human, we might not have the answer as it relates to like programs and like mental health interventions. Yeah, there's a lot of answers there. But like when you're first talking to a family that has a serious crisis on their hands, like you just want somebody who's going to be on the other end of that phone that just cares and that can just sit with you and help you navigate this like really, really scary landscape.
Well, I think you were beautifully suited for that exact job and helping lead the communications around Embark Behavioral Health. Thank you so much, Sabrina, for being here and sharing your stories with us and the impact that they have had not only on you, but on your audiences, your colleagues, your customers, clients, the people you share them with.
Well, thank you. And I will say too, like at the beginning when you asked, like, what is it that you do, Sabrina? And I said, like, I change lives. And I think our organization definitely does. But I feel like through the stories and the people that we meet and my own internal colleagues, like my life has been changed super in ways that I would have never, ever imagined. And so I just feel so grateful. Again, like it's unfortunate that I meet people under these circumstances, I guess. Like I wish that I could be like meeting them at like some resort in Hawaii or something versus because we're all, talking about these really severe and devastating mental health issues. But I will say that my life has been tremendously changed and impacted for good just because of this very robust and powerful and caring and compassionate community of people who really care about ending the stigma around mental health. And I know we've made a little dent. We still have a long way to go, but I just felt like I had to kind of put that out there, that there's just a lot of really amazing people doing really good work.
Absolutely. And you know how your story has come full circle from that day working in the restaurant with your mother, right? You recognize in her this unicorn effect. Well, your unicorn effect is captured in that one line, being the best part of someone's day. And now, having gotten to know you, I can see, Sabrina, how you are probably the best part of everyone's day you come across every single day. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your stories with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And thank you all for listening to this edition. If you or someone you love is suffering with mental health issues, dealing with kids and adolescents, young professionals, by all means, reach out to Embark Behavioral Health. We will have a link in the show notes here, and share this story with them. Share this episode with them, because you never know the impact that you can have by simply being the best part of someone's day. I mean, I've learned that from Sabrina, and now I've got it emblazoned on my computer here, because that's what I attempt to do. I'm not always successful, but it's a good aspirational thought. So I really appreciate that. And of course, if there's anything I can do for you, come on over to the Business of Story. If you have not yet taken your ABTs course, the ABTs of Agile Communications, visit businessofstory.com/ABT. Poor Sabrina, she's been through it with me, but I think it's already had a pretty big impact on your life, the ABT.
100%. Oh my goodness. I literally cannot get the ABTs out of my head. Like, I feel like they just are with me everywhere I go, and I will never interact with the world the same way.
I love hearing that. That's the impact we're having out there in the world too. So thanks for listening. Join us next Monday when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you, like Sabrina. And until then, if you are going to be the best part of someone's day, it all starts with your own story. And the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that's a great one. Thanks so much for listening.